Okay, so we should be up and running. So go ahead, and I see some of you are kind of coming on in, so I will wait a couple minutes and then we'll start. Okay, once you come in, go ahead and say hello on the chat so I know whether you're in. I'll go ahead and start answering your questions. Yes, we'll see the other dog. Oh, we can do it now. She's older. She sleeps a lot. Okay, so we'll start with Julian's question. He asks, what ideas or traits or values are emphasized in a contrast? Well, a contrast, another way to define that would be a difference or pairing of two things that don't necessarily fit. And a lot of times those are easy to spot, but hard to define. Like in the poem they talked about in the lesson, they talk about a blind man's target. Well, what's the sense of that? Or a self-chosen snare. Why would you choose to step into a trap? So when something doesn't make a lot of sense, that type of contrast is what we call a paradox. But there can be other contrasts too. You can have contrasts in mood. You walk from one room to the next. Or like when we read The Great Gatsby, we talked about the contrast in mood when Tom Buchanan came in that room that was full of light, wind, energy, happiness, closes the door with a boom, and then everything settles to the ground and all the life exits the room. So the key thing that all situations all have in common is that there is a difference to notice. And then we think, okay, why is the difference here? What does Tom bring into the room when he closes the door with the boom? There are people that we know who have gotten themselves into situations that they chose that turned out to be negative traps. So what was going on? What can we draw from that? So I guess that's how I would answer that. If you're just coming in now, and you have questions about what we're talking about, you go ahead and put them in the live chat. But I recommend that you go ahead and look at the lesson before you put questions about the lesson, if that makes sense. Okay, this is from Abigail asks, does the lettering in the poem affect the way we split it into sections? And I guess maybe you're talking about the rhyme scheme. Yes and no. I would pay more attention to the sorts of clues that the teachers talked about and that we've talked about: punctuation marks, transition words that suggest contrast, things like but, yet, however, although, even though. Those are all clues that a shift is coming. Is there another way to talk about contrast in poems besides irony and paradox? Sure, because when the mood changes, if the day is sunny, but then all of a sudden it becomes dark and gray, that's a contrast that we would notice. So contrasts come in tone, they can come in mood, they can come in imagery, they can come in simile, metaphor, all of those ways. Okay. Does every poem have an octave and a sestet? No, only sonnets, and not every sonnet. I put a link in Google that talked about the difference between two different types of sonnets, and then today in the lesson they talked about a sonnet that kind of combines the two types. So, and in the lesson they talk about how poets at the time were competing, kind of like musicians compete today. They want to build on each other's trends, so they kind of will blend trends together and put them up there into new works. And so that's kind of interesting. We may sit at the back and or we sit and we look at poems and we think one thing, but back in history in the 15 and 1600s, there was competition in art, just like there's competition in writing and music today. Okay. Let's see. I'm having... Another question: how do we know how to divide a poem? Well, again, look for clues like punctuation marks, commas, periods, semicolons, question marks, exclamation points. Look for where a sentence ends and where another sentence begins. If it's a sonnet, there's only going to be one stanza, so you've got to find clues like that: punctuation, transition words. I also talked about how in some sonnets you look after line 8. In other sonnets, you look at lines 4, 8, and 12 for your divisions. And I'll put pictures up again with the notes from today. So you kind of see where the dividing points are. With other types of poems, like the one they put up in the lesson for the homework, there are a lot of stanzas. So, each stanza can be a division point, or maybe several stanzas are talking about the same thing. You just kind of have to read and get a sense of what each poem's talking about. Okay. The mind is acting weird today. Let's see. Okay, so here's a question. When do we start a new rhyme scheme? Well, you start at the beginning of the poem. The first line is always going to have the letter A. And if the second line rhymes with the first line, then it also has a letter A. Otherwise, you go to letter B, and you keep following that pattern through the poem. Another question: what is an easier way to recognize a paradox? Well, read it and see if it makes sense. If it's a situation that doesn't make sense to you, then it's probably a paradox. The request that Gatsby had of Daisy to not only say that she loved Gatsby, but that she had never loved Tom. Well, that's impossible for her to do, because she wouldn't have married Tom if she hadn't loved him. So there's a paradox. The fact that Gatsby wants something that he cannot have out of that relationship is a paradox. In Brave New World, the fact that people take that drug called Soma over and over again throughout their lives so that they can look young, but then at the age of 60, they're going to die all of a sudden because it's toxic and it builds up in your system over time and you're just going to die. That's kind of a paradox, that you would take something throughout your life knowing that it would end up killing you. So anytime you look at a situation and you're like, I don't really see the logic in this, it's probably got an element of paradox to it. Here's a very good question. During a poem, how do we know if they mean irony or paradox? Irony, a paradox is a situation that contains irony. Irony is anything that's unexpected. But if you're in a specific situation that has unexpected elements to it, then you're caught in a paradox. You might, for some of you who had passing grades in classes in the fall, but you had too many absences to get credit, you might think of that as a paradox. Because I've had people ask the question, what's the deal with minimum attendance if we can get passing grades in the class? Well, that's a paradox. Either the class is too easy, and the teacher's not grading you hard enough, or you already knew way too much to be in that class in the first place, and you probably should have done credit by exam. So a paradox is just the situation that is ironic. So here's a question. If you're dealing with a Shakespearean sonnet, in each quatrain it has a little idea or theme, and the heroic couplet goes back to the first quatrain. Does this always happen? If so, does it sum up the poem? Pretty much, yes. A sonnet can be kind of viewed as an essay, a very short essay, where you have an introduction and you have a conclusion. In the case of the octave and sestet, the first 8 lines are your introduction. What's the question? What's the problem? What's the conflict? And then the last 6 lines are the resolution. In a Shakespearean sonnet, the first 4 lines are going to kind of set out the situation, like in the one we talked about yesterday. They had the feelings of the speaker. Then it moves to the example of the mouse escaping a trap. Then it moves to the example of the fly who was about to die, but did not, ended up living. And then they go back to the feelings of the speaker. So you'll kind of have, a little introduction, then you'll have some examples, or some kind of meandering around in the topic, and then you'll have the couplet that winds it up. Let's see. Julian, is the homework the last poem they showed us with the question? Yes. Let's see. Back. Okay, I believe I've answered all the questions from Remind. So, other questions, other comments? We still don't have a lot of information. We don't have anything new to tell you about the AP test format or the dates, but we should learn something early, middle of next week. Okay, well, tomorrow there's the 3rd lesson. We are not going to do this every day. I'll also put this in the Remind, but Monday, Tuesday, we'll have a reading quiz over chapters 10, 11, and 12 of Brave New World. And we'll have live discussion of the book on Monday and Tuesday. So we're going to keep this going at 11 o'clock Monday through Friday, 30 to 40 minutes. And then I'll decide, once I see the calendar of next week's lessons, we'll decide what we want to look at from the College Board. But Monday, Tuesday, plan 11 to 11:45 or so. We'll talk about the novel, and then we'll have something to write. But I appreciate those of you who are keeping up with the lessons. I know not everybody has Wi-Fi up and running yet. I put a link into Remind if you're having a hard time getting connectivity. And so I think that deals with that. Let's see here. Why are the Italian sonnet and the Shakespearean sonnet different in structure? Well, why are there different types of music? I guess would be my answer to that. I mean, not every song is the same. So imagine, Shakespeare writing a sonnet this way, and then Petrarch, the Italian writer, I'm going to try it this way. I'm going to do it a little differently. And then people like Sir Philip Sidney, whose poem we looked at briefly at the beginning, Edna St. Vincent Millay. We talked about her poem yesterday in the first class. They take the sonnet. Different writers approach the sonnet a little bit differently. They'll say, I'm going to do it with this rhyme scheme. I'm going to do it with that rhyme scheme. I'm going to organize it this way. But they all have 14 lines and they all have 10 syllables. Let's see. Mr. Wellington is doing fine today. He, yes, doing quite well. What else? Last call for questions. Let's see if anything's hit my mind. Okay, if you have issues getting to the documents, if you have issues with the homework, please feel free to send questions. Hey, somebody just put in here, imagine being a Patriots fan. Well, I'm not the Patriots fan in the house, so but some of us are more amused by the Brian Hoyer signing than others. But yes. But they have won a few more Super Bowls than the Cowboys have. Recently, at least. So. Okay. Well, this was fun. It will be a lot more fun when we're all back in the same room. And I will see you guys same time tomorrow.